Yes, good morning, good afternoon, wherever in the world you are. It's just a great pleasure to be with you today. And I'm Gary Hamel. I'm on the faculty of the London Business School, but I live in Northern California. And I'd like to share some thoughts with you today on how you actually build an organization that is fit for the future, but also fit for human beings. And these are goals that are kind of mutually reinforcing. There's no way today to build an organization that can outrun change, that is fit for the future, without building one that is also fit for human beings. Now, this is a big topic, and we're not going to get through it all the way for sure. And probably what I don't say is going to be almost as important as what I do say. So I'm going to give you a kind of a resource here if you want to get my new book, which you can buy now, already pre-ordered in the usual places, or if you want to reach out to me online, that's certainly, you're certainly able to do that. So let's jump in. Many years ago, I wrote an article called The Core Competence of the Corporation. But if I was writing that today, I would probably call it the core incompetence of the corporation, because when you look around the world, organizations of all sorts suffer from the same disabilities. And in many ways, and ironically, they are less capable than the people inside of them. As human beings, we are amazingly resilient. We're adaptable. We deal with all kinds of circumstances, but our organizations really aren't. They struggle, as you know, with change. I mean, if I asked you to think about your own life over the last few years, and asked you, are any of these things true? Have you moved house? Did you change jobs? Did you lose some weight? Maybe you changed your spouse and so on. At least one of these things is probably true for you. As human beings, we are novelty addicts. We love to do new things. We love to travel to new places. We are not against change really at all. We're, of course, against change that's imposed, but where we have agency and where we feel like we have the chance to create a better future for ourselves, our families, we are not against change. And yet, our organizations struggle with this. Living in Silicon Valley today, we expect the incumbents to fumble the future. And you see this again and again, industry after industry. The incumbents have been caught on the back foot. And the challenge here is not resources. The incumbents have more money, more customers, more technology. But we understand that in today's world, what really matters is less resources than resourcefulness. And that is where our organizations struggle. As human beings, we're also immensely creative. You cannot help but create, whether it's laying out a garden, redecorating your house, editing your digital photos, whatever. You were born to create. And yet, our organizations struggle with rule-busting innovation. We look at the world around us, we see creativity everywhere, 500,000 hours of content going up every day on YouTube, hundreds of thousands of blogs getting published, 40 million new photos every day on Instagram. Only about half of them come from the Kardashians. So there is no shortage of creativity in our world. And yet a study that we ran with Harvard Business Review, 68% of employees believe that new ideas are greeted with skepticism or hostility. And in another a big data set, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they calculate that 107 million jobs in America, 70% of all jobs, require little or no creativity or imagination from employees. And the problem is not that employees don't have creativity or imagination, it's that we've locked them into narrow rules where we simply want them to shut up and do their job, and we give them little opportunity to exercise their creativity. Finally, as human beings, we are passionate. I can guarantee you there's something in your life that you're willing to sacrifice for you, that occupies your attention, that inspires you, and yet mostly this doesn't happen at work. A big Gallup survey shows that only about 20% of people, or less than 20% around the world, are fully engaged in their work. And in fact, if you look at the data, what you discover is 17% are fully engaged, a much larger number, 32%, are actively disengaged. These are the maliciously compliant, and the rest, about half, show up every day at work and kind of do their job, but they're really not there emotionally. They're just there physically. And when I first saw this data, which by the way has not changed in about 60 years, the assumption was that, well, a lot of jobs are not very inspiring. We see people every day doing work we're glad we don't have to do. But in fact, when you dig deeper, you find out that about 89% of people enjoy their job. So the problem is not the job, it is the way human beings are managed. That's the problem. Another big Gallup survey, this just done at the end of last year, found that only about 1 in 5 employees is expected to be creative in their jobs. Only about 1 in 5 believes their opinions matter at work, and less than 10% say they can take risks that might lead to a new product or a solution. So we have simply put the intellect, put the emotion of our people in chains, and so that's why so often we see so little innovation in our organizations. And this reflects kind of what you might call controlitis. And yes, we need control in our organizations, but often this becomes a kind of soft tyranny that prevents employees from experimenting, from trying new things that would satisfy the customer, that would improve operations. To get a glimpse of this, consider the fact that when you walk around pretty much any big city, you are going to see people, most people, who could afford to buy a car, or maybe they've even bought a flat or a house, and yet at work, those same people cannot requisition a $300 office chair without getting someone's permission. And we know from a lot of research that when you shrink somebody's autonomy, you also shrink their capacity to dream, to imagine, to create, and somehow we've just grown immune to the stupidity of this, and it really is kind of stupid. So in a sense, today, from every employee, we need a level of obedience. There are rules to follow. We need their diligence to work hard. We need them to be smart, to be well trained. But those human capabilities create very little value in today's economy. What matters is someone's initiative. Are they willing to jump in, go beyond their job description, and take real accountability? Their imagination. Are they learning from other industries, bringing new ideas to work? And most of all, their passion. Are they bringing their courage and their daring to work every day? And so the things at the top of that pyramid, those are human capabilities that cannot be commanded. These are gifts that people literally bring to work every day or not. And the data says that mostly they are not bringing them to work. So we have, as human beings, we're resilient, we're creative, we're passionate, but our organizations, by and large, are not, right? They're inertial, they're incremental, and they're largely indifferent. So I would argue that our organizations are incapacitated by their inhumanity. That most organizations have scant room for exactly the things that make us human: our curiosity, our intuition, our artistry, our playfulness, our love, our daring, and so we end up with organizations that are less capable than the people inside of them. Now, this should not surprise us, because in many ways our organizations were designed to be inhuman. Writing more than 100 years ago, Max Weber, the famous German sociologist, said, "Bureaucracy develops the more perfectly it is dehumanized." So the goal was to drive those human qualities out, because we wanted organizations that were disciplined, that were focused, that were efficient, and so on. And those are important qualities, but they create less and less value in today's economy. And so behind all of this is that management model, bureaucracy, which is the operating model for virtually every large organization in the world. And you can look at your own organization and say, how many of these things are true where you work? That power is invested in positions, that big leaders appoint little leaders, that people get slotted into narrow roles, that managers assign tasks and assess performance. Most of these things are true in most organizations. And yet they frustrate an enormous amount of human creativity at work. And sadly, bureaucracy is growing, not shrinking. If you look since 1983, this is indexed, the number of managers and administrators, supervisors in the US economy has more than doubled. It's grown by 112%. And all other job categories have grown by less than 50%. And we see this across the world. In Germany, in the UK, in every developed economy, bureaucracy is growing faster than the organizations themselves. And this is not primarily a function of demands of government regulation, external compliance. This is primarily our internal busy work and rules and procedures that tie people up and prevent them from bringing those amazing qualities to work. So I'd like to ask, can we start to make a fundamental shift? Can we move from organizations that are built on the bureaucratic model, where the goal was to maximize conformance, compliance, control? Can we move from that to what I might call humanocracy, where the goal is to maximize contribution and courage and creativity? And I think the answer is yes. But what we have to do is we have to figure out how we buy the benefits of bureaucracy, the control, the coordination, the consistency, how to buy that all duty-free. And again, this is possible. And in the next about 15 minutes, let me give you some keys on how we might be able to do this, how we might be able to literally hack management in a very productive way. Well, the first step is we have to count the cost. The dilemma is that most of the costs of bureaucracy are invisible. They never show up on a P&L. They certainly impede performance, they impede change, they undermine organizational resilience, but we don't really measure them. And you know what you can be quite sure is that managers only pay attention to things that they can measure. So we need kind of an organizational BMI, right? Not a body mass index, but a bureaucratic mass index that can start to calculate these costs. A decade ago, very few organizations calculated their environmental impact. Now, most do, and that's a healthy thing. But very few calculate the ways in which bureaucracy is frustrating their organizations, where it's introducing apathy and rigidity and conformity and insularity and so on. Now, we built an instrument that you can use. It's free. If you go to the website for Harvard Business Review, hbr.org, you put in bureaucratic mass index or my name, you can find this instrument. It's free. You can download it. You can use it to start to kind of benchmark where your organization is. And then every year the challenge is, how do we reduce that number? How do we slowly work the bureaucracy out of our organizations? Now, you also have to believe this is truly possible. And the good news is there's a growing number of post-bureaucratic organizations around the world that are proving you can run large, complex businesses with a minimum or almost zero traditional bureaucracy. And if we had a day, I would take you through a half dozen examples. We'd do a deep dive. I'm going to give you only one very quickly. But here's an organization. It's fairly new. It got started about a decade ago. And from the beginning, they said, our goal is to create an organization that's all humanity and no bureaucracy. Now, shouldn't that be the dream of every HR professional? All humanity, no bureaucracy. This is a Dutch company. It's the largest provider of home health care in the Netherlands. It's called Buurtzorg. And you have a company with about 11,000 nurses that are across the Netherlands. And the company is organized into small teams of 12 nurses each. And each team operates mostly like its own independent business. They are responsible for doing all the things that in most companies, administrators or managers would be responsible for. They are literally running this like a small business. They are accountable for results. And there's an extreme amount of decentralization. This is really entrepreneurship in small teams inside of a large organization. And what keeps all of this kind of together and from fragmenting is a shared purpose. They have shared platforms where they're sharing best practice. If you have a question as a nurse, you're up against a problem with your client, with a patient, you can Google you can reach out to 11,000 other nurses on their internal platforms. You'll get an answer in just a few minutes. So they are exploiting the wisdom of the crowd, not the wisdom of a few leaders or a few managers. Teams are highly accountable for their results. The performance of every team is visible to every other team. They do have a few coaches that you can call on if you need a deeper sort of help. And every employee is deeply trained in what it takes to run a business, to solve problems, to collaborate with your colleagues. So Buurtzorg, here's this thing, almost 11,000 nurses, 36 coaches. They have 50 back office staff working mainly in IT, and they have only 2 line managers, the managing director and an assistant. So imagine an organization delivering a complex service to millions of people, and you have the span of control is 1 manager to about 5,500 employees. And Buurtzorg outperforms all of their competitors on virtually every measure of performance. Now, this may seem very odd. It is not that odd. There are other companies, Svenska Handelsbanken, Nucor in the United States. Many companies are now beginning to explore this new model of how do you build an organization that's truly human-centric rather than bureaucracy-centric. So a third critical step is you cannot uninstall bureaucracy, and we cannot build these new hyper-empowered, hyper-resilient organizations unless we start with new principles. You know, so often we go out and we benchmark other companies and we're looking at their practices. And we try to import those and graft those onto the old bureaucratic rootstock and then wonder why those new practices, whether it's mindfulness training or agile teams, why it doesn't really make a difference, why it doesn't change the essential essence of our organizations. Well, what we need is a deeper change, something that's more like DNA. You know, you can put a tutu on a dog, but that doesn't make the dog a ballerina, right? It still has canine DNA. And the same is true in our organizations. And in any field of human endeavor, you ultimately reach a point where you cannot solve the new problems with the old principles, right? You can't understand the subatomic world with Newtonian physics. We needed something entirely new called quantum mechanics. And I think we're at that same point in our organizations, right? Our organizations are built on the principles of stratification, standardization, specialization, and so on. And those principles are deeply embedded in every process, everything we do, how we hire, how we motivate, how we compensate, how we allocate resources. All of that reflects those principles. So by the way, they're not all bad principles. But if we want to build organizations that are as capable as the people inside of them, then we have to start with a new set of principles and say, how do we build organizations that are deeply experimental, like Amazon? How do you build organizations that are built around meritocracy, where teams have the power to fire incompetent leaders? How do you build organizations that are open internally and externally to new ideas, where the organization feels like a community, where there is affinity and people feel like this is a family and they're willing to sacrifice for one another and take risks for one another, and where every employee feels like an owner? Not in the sense of having a tiny shareholding, but every employee has the decision rights and has the financial upside that you find in a startup. Can you do this? Yes, you can. One of the most progressive companies in the world hired the world's leader in domestic appliances based in Qingdao, China. Hire runs a 80,000 person organization as a network of 4,000 micro enterprises. And they have all the benefits of entrepreneurship at scale, as well as having the benefits of being a big company that can invest in technology and take big risks. And if you want to know more about Hire, again, go to HBR. I wrote a long piece on them with my co-author a year or so ago, and you can get a deep dive into their model. So starting with a different set of principles, how do you actually start to hack that old management model? Well, let me give you a couple of very quick examples. One is drawn from some work we did with Adidas in North America. We invited all of their North American employees, 3,000 employees, online to kind of a hackathon where each week we would tee up a new principle. We'd talk about openness or meritocracy or a critical principle. And then we'd ask 3,000 people, if we were serious about that, what will we change in our management model? What will we change in how we allocate our resources, how we do strategy, how we plan, how we onboard people? So literally we gave 3,000 people the permission to hack the company's management model. Out of that came 4,000 kind of mini hacks, 20,000 likes. We then went through a peer review rating, 9,000 peer reviews of all these ideas. The best 800 ideas got developed into full-blown hacks. These were experiments that could be run inside of Adidas to test these new ideas. And the first round of 20 so experience got launched. We brought people together in a physical setting to kind of really design those as experiments they could run. And so this is how we're going to beat bureaucracy, not in one kind of Armageddon-like battle, not in some top-down, highly scripted change management program. By the way, change management is an oxymoron. It's like a man bun, right? It's like this is bottom up. This is a change program that rolls up, doesn't roll out. It's one that is socially constructed, not constructed at the top. But the way we're going to beat bureaucracy is by experimenting across the organization with new ways of managing, ways that instantiate these new principles, that root around the old power structures. This is how life itself evolves, right? Through constant experimentation. We need that same approach in how we evolve our management model. So to kind of look at it a bit graphically, it's really asking the whole organization, let's think about these new principles that we have to embed in our organization. And in each cell, what are the ideas you have for how we operationalize this? So I described that briefly. Again, in my new book, we go through in great detail how you get this started, how it works, but that's a little overview. And like every experiment, you know, you start small, you use volunteers, you don't blow anything up before you test the new thing, and you iterate again and again. So, you know, we need an approach to evolving our organizational model that is revolutionary in intent, in the way that Buurtzorg or Hire is a revolutionary departure from that old model. So we need an approach that is revolutionary in intent, but evolutionary in actuality. So we don't blow things up, so you don't provoke a wall of resistance in your organization. Finally, you need to start where you are, right? So many of us, we have a kind of learned helplessness, and we believe that we can't really change the organization unless you're the CEO or the CHRO or, you know, some other CXO. And so we just feel we're helpless to change these processes and the structures inside our organization. That is not the case. Let me give you a 2-minute case study from Michelin. And a HR leader at Michelin named Bertrand Ballerin, who had worked as a factory manager. Michelin, the second largest tire company in the world, their productivity growth had stalled out a few years ago. And Bertrand believed the way to solve that problem was to build a culture of empowerment and bottom-up experimentation. And without anybody's permission, Bertrand started visiting plant leaders around the world at Michelin. And he didn't talk to the plant leaders, he talked to frontline supervisors. And his goal was to find supervisors who would be willing to do a year-long experiment in giving their power away to their teams. At the end of the day, he found 37 supervisors who said, yes, we're willing to try this. Bertrand did not have a script. There wasn't a big program cooked up. He just said, just try this for a year, see what happens. At the end of the year, they brought these people together. They found that they'd had enormous success, that their teams were now doing scheduling, managing HR issues, taking responsibility for quality in ways that had never happened before. In the average team, productivity had gone up by 10% in a single year. So an enormous success. But what Bertrand realized is when you start a change program and it's widely distributed, and when you're using volunteers, nobody can stop it. And by the time anybody noticed what was going on, this thing had become irreversible at Michelin. And so it moved from supervisors up to plants and now up to head office. But it was kind of almost the opposite of a traditional change program. So if you want to make a difference, if you want to be an activist or a hacktivist in your own organization, it takes courage to kind of take on the system. It takes compassion for the people whose lives you want to change. And it takes an understanding of how you build true community across the organization. And Bertrand illustrated all of those things. You know, it's amazing to me that so many CEOs will talk about how they need their organization to be more, you know, to change faster and to embrace change. And yet I know of no organization that's taught every employee how to be an activist, not a terrorist, but somebody who loves their company, wants to make it better, and will start right where they are doing that. So, you know, Thomas Paine, the great intellect behind the American Revolution, writing a couple hundred years ago, he said, a long habit of not thinking a thing wrong gives it a superficial appearance of being right. And he was talking about aristocracy and about monarchy. But the same applies to bureaucracy. We have been buried for so long in all this bureaucratic bullshit that somehow we just think it's the only way to do it and that somehow it's okay. It is not okay. We are squandering an extraordinary amount of human capacity. And when you look at some of the data I showed you earlier, it is not too much to argue that many companies waste more human capacity than they use. So if you have the guts, here's a little sign you can put up in your office, and we'll make sure you get a copy of this. Warning, this is a bureaucracy-free zone. pettifogging desk jockeys, butt-kissing suck-ups, meddling head office stoolies, half-witted bean counters, self-important staff weenies, sadistic bosses, and pencil-pushing blowhards will be named, shamed, and run off the property. If you have the guts to put that up in your office, that's a good start. If you have the guts to start a small experiment with your team, if you're willing to give away some of your power, that's a good start. You know, I think we have the chance to reinvent management and reinvent the organizational model in profound ways. And now is the time to do it. Companies have spent decades optimizing the operating model. They've spent years trying to digitize the business model. And now, at long last, we have to humanize the management model. And I'm pretty sure that some of you on this conference today are going to be in a position to do that. You're going to have the courage to do that. And when you do it, tell me, write me a note, and we'll celebrate the success and we'll pass it on. So thanks so much to Enrique and Hacking HR. It was great to have the chance to spend some time with you. Hope the rest of the program is fantastic.